Welcome to the Megillah Project.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
ויהי בימי אחשוורוש, הוא אחשוורוש, המולך מהודו ועד כוש, 27 מדינה. I'm going to share some thoughts about the Book of Esther, and I want to first credit my teacher, Eran Baruch, from the secular yeshiva of Bina in Tel Aviv, who taught me most of this. So thank you. So I want to claim that the Book of Esther is a secular text. And I'm going to prove it, at least try to, and show different aspects that one might expect from a text in the Bible, religious aspects, and we will examine them and see that they are actually missing in the Megillah text. And then we will ask, so if it's a secular text, why was it included in the Bible? And we know that there was a very big dispute around it. The rabbis weren't sure about it. This book and other books, like Song of Songs. So that's the question that I want to ask. If it's a secular text, why is it in the Bible? Why is it in the Tanakh? Why is it part of the 24 books of the scripture? So how can I show that the Book of Esther is a secular text? Let's look for God. The name of God does not appear in the Megillah. You can look very, very carefully. You will not find the name of God. So there are two books in the Jewish Bible, Song of Songs and the Book of Esther, where you cannot find the name of God. So we know that the rabbis were very concerned about it. The rabbis following the rabbis who decided to include the text in the Tanakh and found very, very, very creative ways to show that God is there. For example, talking about Hester Panim, so a wordplay with the name of the book, Esther. You can, if you read it, Hester, that's cover. So God's face are covered, are hidden, but God is there in every step. The story of the Megillah, there is like an interesting plot, there is a problem, and it is solved. It is not solved by God, at least not by the way it is described. The way the story is described is it was solved by people. So everything was kind of orchestrated, not from an external power. It is very much a people's story. The problem was caused by people and it was solved by people. Not even that, there is the lottery. So it's even more distinct to see that there is no an obvious, some guiding hand, outside force that kind of orchestrates everything. What we can see is that it's not that there were not opportunities for the Megillah writer to insert God. For example, let's look at the text where Mordechai is really discovering that the Jewish people are in danger and the Jewish people might be killed. And this is how this is what we see. ומרדכי ידע את כל אשר נעשה, ויקרא מרדכי את בגדיו, וילבש שק ואפר, ויצא בתוך העיר, ויזעק זעקה גדולה ומרה. So Mordechai is shouting. Mordechai is crying. Why doesn't the text say that he prayed to God? Why doesn't the text say that he's crying and looking at his master and asking for a solution? You see, it's a very spontaneous response. I read it in the melody of a different book, the Book of Eicha, Lamentations, because a few verses in Megillah Esther, in the Book of Esther, the sad ones are read not in the joyful melody of Megillah Esther, the one that I started with, but in the lamentation style, which is really interesting. So I don't see God here. And what is very interesting is that there is one place that the rabbis, the commentary really tries to cling on and show, where Mordechai tells Esther that she must save them. She must save the Jewish people. And if she doesn't, this is what he says. כי אם החרש תחרישי בעת הזאת, רווח והצלה יעמוד ליהודים ממקום אחר, ואת ובית אביך תאבדו. רווח והצלה יעמוד ליהודים ממקום אחר. There will be salvation. There will be deliverance, but from another quarter, another place. And it's interesting to see that there are attempts to claim that mimakom acher, makom is God. But we know that makom, as referencing to God, exists, but only in the rabbinic language, not in the Bible. Biblical language does not connect makom with God. So it's a really nice creative way to say, yes, God is there. But again, it is very, very distinct to see that God is not part of the text. You can't really argue with that. There are very interesting customs when reading the Megillah. Some phrases you can find the acronym of Yud Hey Vav Hey, that is another name of God. And some people read those texts even louder to show that God is there. So from all these examples, you can show that it really bothered the rabbis and the commentators, the lack of God's presence. So we are going to really look at other aspects that you would expect from a text in the Bible, a religious text. So we saw that there is no God, and we know that this book actually marks a transition in the prophecy period, that there is less direct connection with God and less of having the voice of God through a person and more like internal, the way that we are more familiar with in later times. Let's look at the practice. Does Mordechai keep Shabbat? Does Esther keep kosher? Do we have any of that in the text? So we know that Haman wanted to kill all the Jews because they had different customs, but we don't have anything about that. There are beautiful midrashim saying how Esther kept kosher when she was in the palace. And as a kid, I loved those midrashim, but there is nothing in the actual text about that. We do know that Mordechai doesn't want to bow down to Haman, but that is not a religious practice that we find. What we do find is fast. And you could claim that fasting is a religious ritual, but let's see how it looks, how the fasting is described. When Esther asks Mordechai to fast when she goes to the palace, this is how she says, Go assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. So it is coming from Esther. It's not a religious authority. And it is very, very clear that this is an act of solidarity. So Esther is there risking her life, and she wants everyone to show their support and fast. So, okay, we looked for God. We looked for something that has to do with practice and ritual, and we found none of those. And we actually know that Mordechai is a Jew not by his lifestyle. We cannot detect that from the way he behaves. We know that he's a Jew because the text tells us so. So here is where we get acquainted with Mordechai. איש יהודי היה בשושן הבירה, ושמו מרדכי, בן יאיר, בן שמעי, בן קיש, איש ימיני, אשר הוגלה מירושלים, עם הגולה אשר הוגלתה, עם יחוניה מלך יהודה, אשר הגלה נבוכדנצר מלך בבל. So the text tells us that he is Ish Yehudi. He is a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin. That is how we know he's a Jew. And it also says that he won't bow down to Haman because he's a Jew. But again, no other specific practices come with that in the text. Okay, so we didn't find God, we didn't find any religious practices. Let's look about Israel. So we are talking about a very successful, established community in the diaspora in Persia. This is the time of the Second Temple. There is a community in Jerusalem. There is worship in the temple. And there are communities that are outside of Israel, especially in the area of Persia, Babylonia. They live there. And before this incident, they were pretty comfortable. And they are comfortable after. We don't see anything about yearning to Jerusalem. We don't see anything about wanting to go back to Israel once things are solved. We see that they stay there. We don't see any mention of that, of the temple, of Israel. There is one mention of Jerusalem, what we just read, because that is how Mordechai is described. Mordechai is described to the fact that his family was exiled from Jerusalem. That is the only mention of Jerusalem. And if you notice, that piece was also read in the melody of Eicha, because it mentions the exile. And of course, it's a sad part of the story. So we didn't see anything about God. We didn't see any religious practices. We didn't find Israel or the temple. What we do have is a very colorful, very hedonistic spirit. We see drinking, we see partying. That is what we feel, the atmosphere of the Megillah. It is pretty different than other texts in the Tanakh. And this is why the rabbis weren't sure. So we have the documented considerations, which books are going to be canonized and which books are going to stay out of the Bible, which is very, very, very interesting. We find that in Masechet Yadayim, Tractate Yadayim, hands, because the texts that are holy are purifying the hands, which is a very, very interesting halachic category. But just to be general about it, the rabbis argue about it. They're not sure whether it should be part of the Tanakh, maybe because there is no God, maybe because it is very different in the atmosphere, not very religious, not only the components, but also the kind of feel of it. And the decision is not only that the text is part of the Bible, it is the main ritual of Purim. So in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, you have 6 pieces, 6 parts, and one part, Moed, is about the holidays, and in it, we have tractates for different holidays. So Psachim for Pesach, you have Masechet Sukkah for Sukkot, you have Yoma for Yom Kippur, and for Purim, you have Megillah tractate. So the tractate, the Talmudic tractate and the Tanaic tractate about Purim is actually focusing on the ritual of reading the text, reading the Megillah. And the rabbis are actually very explicit about the obligation to read it from the scroll, not just say it by heart. And the scroll itself actually symbolizes the fact that it is a holy text that you have to read very carefully and to be very, very respectful. So this is a very, very interesting paradox. You have a secular text that is a part of the Bible and is the main ritual of the holiday of Purim. So why is that? So I can come up with my answers, and it can start a very interesting conversation. But there is one piece that is very interesting when thinking about the identity of the people in the text. So they identify as Jews. They identify as Jews, and for them, Judaism is a peoplehood. Judaism is a community, and that is where they have a sense of belonging. לא הגידה אסתר את עמה ואת מולדתה, כי מרדכי ציווה עליה אשר לא תגיד. Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred. So it's not that she practiced the Jewish rituals. It's not that she thought about God. It's not that she thought about Jerusalem. She just felt part of the Jewish people. And obviously, it's a very distinct thing because Achashverosh and Haman recognized the Jews as a group, as a community, even if they didn't really follow the practical aspect of the Jewish law. So I think that the sense of belonging and how Judaism is brought here, basically, maybe you can call it Judaism as a culture, call it peoplehood, but it's a very interesting part that I think the rabbis did want that to be part of the Tanakh. And another answer, that is an answer that I got from my teacher, Eran Baruch, is that the rabbis wanted some heresy in the Bible. They wanted the heretical content because the rabbis wanted multi-voiced, diverse conversation, different perspectives about Judaism, about what is it to be a Jew and how does a Jew live their lives. So yes, it's a secular text. It is somewhat heretical. God is not mentioned. The whole plot is led by people. They're not running back to Israel once they're saved. And it's there. And it's a story that we read twice during Purim, in the evening and in the morning, because it really enriches the conversation about who we are. So heretical text as part of the Bible. What do you say about that?